Welcome, everyone, to the Poker Fuse podcast. I'm Mike Gentili here with my co-host, Nick Jones. Nick, how you doing today?
Hi there, very good. Episode 3, eh? Who would have thought it?
Yeah, we're going to try and keep it at a tight 30 minutes.
Always.
Actually, there was a lot of talk last week about how we were going to go over, and I think if we had cut out all the talk about how long it was going to be, we probably actually might have even been under the 30-minute mark.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't waste our whole intro talking about how we shouldn't talk about going over 30 minutes?
Yeah, too late.
Okay, well, we have got a lot to go through. I'm going to say this was one of the busiest weeks in online poker news in years. It's been jam-packed.
And they're big events, too, and not little things.
Yeah, big events. And the reality is we're not going to be talking on all of them now. We might touch on a few, but if some things that we don't talk on, they'll be on Poker Fuse, they'll be on Poker Industry Pro, so do take a look there as well. But we are going to try and get through as much as we can in our time.
Perhaps the biggest news of the week has been the launch of Run It Once Poker, the brand new online poker site that is founded by Phil Galfond, famous high-stakes grinder and poker trainer. Nick, you've had a chance to play on the site. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's I love it. So we've been talking about it since he first announced it, like 2.5 years ago. We've been playing in all the tests that they've had over the last 6 months, trying it out. So it's a fascinating project. It's really exciting, honestly. All the excitement that you read about it, if you don't like you, Mike, you don't have the opportunity to play on it. It is genuine. What the product he's got, it's in some respects very bare bones. There's a lot of work to do, but it does a lot of things right, and there's a lot of interesting ideas there, and it's a pretty exciting product launch.
One of the big features that we've seen here with the launch of Run It Once is the way that they're distributing their rewards, which is through something called Splash the Pot.
Right, so yeah, they announced this just a couple of days before they announced that they were going live, which is smart because it's such a good idea, such an interesting idea that it made sense for them to hold this close to their chests until launch time. But the broad idea is that their entire rewards program is basically redistributing half the rate that they take back to players by randomly dropping it in pots at the cash game tables at the start of each hand. So these are called splashes, and they happen randomly, and they can be anything from one big blind up to I think 1,000 big blinds in the very unlikely extreme cases, and then people compete over that money in the pot. And we've seen ideas like this run as promotions by PokerStars in their milestone hands. I think they've done Christmas promos similar to this. The milestone hand idea has been done by Winamax, Unibet, other sites. But to do this as the core part of the rewards program is fascinating. It solves a lot of the problems with rewards. I think there's a lot of flexibility in the system. It makes the game very interesting. It adds an extra strategic dimension to the hands that have splash pots. So yeah, I mean, when they announced it, I mean, everyone I think was like, wow, that's really interesting. And playing it for the first time this week, it's better than I expected. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, some of the points that jump out at me about Splash the Pot are, number one, that it rewards all players equally, which isn't something that you see in a lot of other rewards programs that tend to give higher and better rewards to high volume players.
Yeah, I mean, it rewards players who win pots. Obviously, you have to win the hand, so it encourages looser play style. It's going to reward the people that are competing over those pots. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's exceptionally transparent. I mean, that's not too surprising. Hearing Phil Galfond's pronouncements about what makes a good poker site, I think transparency was a key word there. So it's not surprising. This is a very, very transparent system. With that said, we don't actually know how frequently the pots trigger, and then kind of what the the randomization of sizes of splash pots. But I mean, that doesn't really matter. Yeah, everyone is kind of treated the same. Everyone has the same opportunity. There doesn't seem to be a way of really gaming the system. People have talked about, joining in loose tables and playing nitty so that you can reap the benefits of the other players at the table. In reality, this is a blind lobby system. You don't get to choose the tables you play in. You won't even know if you quit and join another table whether it's the same table or a new one, because I think that's true. Because the player names are randomized each time. I think there is a 4-hour window where some player names will stay the same. But broadly speaking, you're not going to be able to jump around finding the loose tables. So it just seems like a really fun, interesting way of redistributing, the rake. And what's very interesting about the announcement is that they have gone for a pretty high rake and high rewards, which is definitely the trend in the industry, but there was perhaps some expectation from some concern that they would go the other way around, which I think would have been a mistake. So it's good to see, in my mind, that they've gone this way.
Yeah, another interesting point that I find about Splash the Pot is that it reduces the amount of unclaimed rewards. So when a site has rewards and players don't actually redeem them, that money stays in the operator's pocket, and there's no transparency with other operators as to what percentage of rewards are actually redeemed. Here at Run It Once, we know that 100% of all of the rewards are being distributed.
Yeah, so there's no loss redemption. There's no wagering requirements. There's no separate bonus account. There's none of this really, and I think in many ways this system as a basis has got many of the advantages of what PokerStars wanted in their chests stars reward system, in that it gives them the flexibility to distribute other prizes. So when they launch tournaments in the future, they can splash the pot with satellite buy-ins or ticket buy-ins. So something that PokerStars did with Stars Rewards is give away tickets to live events or satellites or free rolls, and this is that, but public and interesting and exciting and fun. And it always, although everyone knows it's their rewards program, it always feels like it's extra. It's like, there's a splash pot, let's compete for that. Whereas chests, if you watch like streamers open their chests, it's almost a bit of a grind of like, click to open it, and no, it's another 50p. But so it's just, there's a mentality behind it which I think is instantly understandable, fun, recognizable. It's the benefits are numerous.
So with all the good things that we've been talking about with Splash the Pot and the rewards at Run It Once, that's not to say that there aren't some things that they still are working through. For instance, the splash of a pot with 1,000 big blinds. I've seen where people have been responding in the online forums and such, saying that this really changes the way that they play. They would spend a fair amount of time working up their stack to a couple of hundred big blinds, and then a big splash the pot comes and everybody is obviously all in pre-flop in order to try and win that big splash of 1,000 big bet rewards, and that causes some issues where I think it might inadvertently cause people to start rat holing and taking money off the table, so that when a big splash does occur, they don't have such a big stack at risk.
Yeah, one good thing there is that the buy-in is always 100 big blinds, so you can't, if you allowed short stacking, this system just wouldn't work at all. But I do feel like the 1,000 big blind thing is too high. It's interesting thinking about the skill strategic curve to this system. So when you add in, a few big bets to a pot, the skill edge increases, because now you're dealing with a situation which you've never dealt with before. You have to try and take into account this added money. Obviously, everyone's going to know that you have to play looser, but how much looser, people don't know yet. People kind of haven't solved that. And I've even seen people posting going like, oh, it's amazing, 2 big blinds gets added into a splash pot and you get 4 all-ins pre-flop, So it adds this whole new dimension of this money getting added, and multi-tabling is going to be a lot harder. But something that really surprised me is that I played 4 tables for about half an hour, and they happen all the time, which surprised me, because you think, okay, say the table is taking 12, 14 big bets per 100 hands, something like that. They're returning half of that. Some of the time, that's going to be held back for the big 100 or 1,000 splashes. So you think it would be fairly infrequent, but it just felt it always one was happening or it just happened across my 4 tables. So that's always happening, and that's exciting. But I think it gets past a point where obviously the obvious correct play to almost everyone is going all in pre-flop, and I don't know what that point would be. Definitely, I feel a stack, 100 big blinds. That's regardless of your hand, that's going to be an all-in. It's going to be a lot lower than that. And obviously now all of a sudden the skill edge just drops off because now you're all just flipping big stacks to win the money in the middle, which is a shame. And I saw Phil Galvin respond to someone and say they're already tweaking these numbers and reducing the frequency of these high payouts. And I think that's a good idea. I think maybe removing that entirely is a good idea. But again, if anything, this demonstrates to me one of the great things about the system is it's flexible. They can decide, let's remove that, and they can just deploy that. They can decide, let's run happy hours in the morning and do double splashes. It's such a great flexible system for that kind of tweaking.
Yeah, and they are continuing to work on it and tweak it, as well as other things as well. It officially, Run It Once Poker launched as a public beta. There have been reports of software issues that are still happening. From everything I've read, they've been acknowledged. They've been working on it. What have you heard about continuing software issues, Nick?
Yeah, so they've across all the tests that they've done, they've had some technical issues. There are still some there. It sounds like that. So they launched aware of some, and they were definitely present. The biggest one is that if you sit out at a table, a lot of the time you can't sit back in again. You have to close it down and start it up again, which is obviously a real pain. It doesn't affect the integrity of the hands in themselves, which is good. A big problem that they had through the first 3 beta tests that they did was really long hand delays between hands being dealt. That wasn't an issue. So that big problem was fixed, but they still have that. They have some issues with their sign-up form, things like that, which are going to be fixed in the open, in the public, which is just going to be part of it and part of the process, unfortunately.
So beyond the things that they're working on, what other aspects of the site can we expect to see coming forward that may have not made it to the initial launch? Yeah,
so there are maybe 3 big things that I think 2 big things that until they add, they will always going to struggle with a lot of players to build liquidity. And until they have that, it's going to be hard for them to judge whether their product really is a success because they're so hampered by the lack of those features. And those 2 are tournaments and a mobile client. So they've launched with cash games only. It's understandable. It's a much easier problem to solve. Tournaments, there are many more variables. So we're talking sit and goes. We're talking the variety of sit and goes that you can have. We're talking about MTTs, guarantees, all of that. So it's understandable that will come later, but it does need to come. And until they have it, sit and goes as such. Many markets, it represents about 2/3 of the total online gaming revenue that's generated in that market. Sit and goes are hugely popular. Obviously, spin and goes, lottery sit and goes are now also a huge revenue generator. And it's to the point that if you don't have them, then a consumer is going to feel that like their poker needs are not being satisfied by that operator. We saw Unibet kind of hold back on launching their own version of a lottery sit and go for literally years, and launched one in the last couple of months, basically kind of conceding defeat and realizing that you just have to have it as part of the core poker product now that you have to have. But that's just talking lottery sit and goes. Before that, we've got to have sit and goes. We've got to have tournaments, which again are a huge draw. The big tournaments, whether it's your scoops, whether it's millions online, or just the smaller guys, Unibet's tournament series, they have 3 a year, 888s. They're core. Until they have that, they're kind of not really going to know whether how successful they can be.
Galfan's been pretty open and transparent communicating with the poker community. Has he given any indication of when we might see tournaments?
I think in the coming months is perhaps the most specific I've seen. They're definitely, for that kind of timeline, they're obviously in the works and can't be far off. I know maybe 6 months ago in a blog post it was, or maybe a year ago, it was kind of, do we wait until tournaments are ready or do we launch? So obviously they've been developing them in parallel, but tournaments are like cash games but with more stuff, aren't they? You need a lobby, you just need more functionality. So it obviously makes sense to start with the cash games. And the other big one is a mobile client, and I think it's easy for us, probably lots of listeners, to who just play on desktop. They play on lots of sites. They have third-party tools where they're allowed, and poker is always desktop. And if you're a very serious poker player, I think almost all play happens on desktop. And it's easy for us to forget that mobile is just such a core part of acquiring more casual players. I believe it was PokerStars said recently in a quarterly report that they acquire more customers through mobile than desktop, which is not surprising at all. That might have been the case for many years now. And again, until they have a good client on iOS and Android, they're really always going to struggle in acquiring mobile first customers.
Yeah, and even the data that we get from regulators around the world show that it is definitely, the trend is towards mobile gaming, and that segment of how people actually access the online games has been increasing steadily. What's the traffic looking like over at Run It Once?
Yeah, so we have the data from Game Intel, formerly Poker Scout, that tracks on all the online poker operators. They're tracking Run It Once. We already have the data coming into the Poker Industry Pro data platform. If you have that, they have, we have one figure for yesterday's average concurrent cash game players, which was 50 or something in that region. But it's fairly meaningless because obviously they launched partway through the day. It's one day. I saw peaks of over 300 concurrent players in the early evening European time yesterday. If that was their 24-hour average, it's going to put them in the area of Unibet and MPN. They're in the 400 to 550 kind of mark. Again, direct comparisons are tricky because Run It Once doesn't have tournaments. So on one hand, they're going to be obviously much more predominant in cash games. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be obviously a metric that we look to in the future over the coming weeks to see kind of how well they've performed in this early launch phase and see where they go from here.
Also in the news this week is the World Series of Poker. They have officially released their final batch of gold bracelet events, or have they? So the press release that came out specifically stated in the title that it was the final batch of live events, but in the press release itself, it did say that this was the final batch of bracelet events. However, the schedule does not, as of yet, include any of the online bracelet events. I got a chance to talk with organizers over at the World Series of Poker, the vice president of corporate communications for Caesars Interactive and the World Series of Poker, Seth Polanski. Talked with him yesterday about it, and he did assure me that there will be online poker bracelet events this year.
And do we know yet how many bracelet events they're going to have in 2019 online?
We don't know the exact number, but Seth did tell me that we will see an increase in the number of online bracelet events. Last year, they had 4, 3 of them with guarantees, all of them surpassing those guarantees by quite a comfortable margin. And we also saw last year for the first time a player from New Jersey win an online bracelet event while in New Jersey.
So we're obviously entering a fairly interesting period here, and the WSOP are in a tricky spot in many ways because we don't know yet, come the summer, whether New Jersey players are going to be allowed to play on a shared player pool with the WSOP and thus compete for bracelets.
Yeah, and I don't think they know yet either. This, my opinion, is it's only going to be Nevada. I find that the course of events that would have to happen in order to allow New Jersey players to continue to play for these online bracelet events just seems unrealistic at this point. We don't know, first of all, what the DOJ is going to come out with regard to enforcement guidelines. We don't know what the higher-ups at Caesars, if they're going to want to take that risk of being in violation of the law. And also, we don't know what the Nevada regulators are going to have to say about this. It could be that it's their position that WSOP and the All-American Poker Network cannot continue to provide this because of the opinion that came out of the Department of Justice. But at this point, we just don't know.
We have seen in the last week the first kind of opening salvo in response to the Wire Act reinterpretation.
Yeah, so we've seen a number of organizations begin to push back against the DOJ. First was the lottery's lobbying organization. They came out. And then we also saw a joint letter from the attorneys general from New Jersey and Pennsylvania. There's also been a Freedom of Information Act request for correspondence that went into making this opinion for the DOJ, and there's a lot of suspicion that that may lead to influence from the Sands Corporation, aka Sheldon Adelson.
That's a fairly strong response, would we say? Is it the best kind of response we could have hoped for as an online poker advocate?
I think so. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. They were calling specifically for the DOJ to repeal this opinion. I don't see that happening. I think that in the long run, it's either going to have to be a court challenge where this will become settled law, or B, we will see a new superseding law be put into place that would then render the opinion of the DOJ moot.
Okay. And just circling back to the WSOP, am I right in saying that earlier on this year, they actually ran an online promotion or online tournaments that awarded seats into an online bracelet event?
Right, so that could be tricky. They did do that in New Jersey specifically. So players that are in New Jersey did win tickets to these online events that have yet to be announced. If it turns out that players from New Jersey are not able to participate from New Jersey, it's quite possible that they will just substitute those for cash prizes, or who knows, perhaps they'll even fly them out to Las Vegas to compete online in Nevada.
So we've also seen a flurry of news updates from Partypoker over the last week. A trio, each one kind of bigger and bolder and stranger than the last. So the first one we saw, which kind of got a quiet release on social media, is a new tool that we think is called My Coach, which we honestly haven't looked into yet.
Yeah, it looks really interesting from what I've seen. I haven't dug into it very much, but I plan on doing so. So look for an article to describe exactly what that is coming on PokerFuse soon.
So things that we have disseminated so far is they've launched this new 60% VIP loyalty tier, and they've also rebranded their lottery sit and go offer to spins.
Yeah, so we talked about the rewards level of Run It Once being at 50% plus, and if we didn't, it is 51%. And now we see Party with 60%. That reminds me of the PokerStars Supernova.
So yeah, it's a classic party poker move, I guess. And if anything, we're just seeing in 2019 they're going to be even bolder and even more direct at courting, disenfranchised, high volume ex PokerStars players. So this is a new tier on top of their existing cashback VIP program, which they announced a couple of years ago, which pays a baseline of, I think, 20% cashback direct to players up to 40%. And they've had that for a couple of years. And then they also had like an invite only 50% Diamond Club tier for people that started tables and that kind of thing. But now they've added on top of that this new 60% tier, which is open to everybody. It gives you just all of the things that a high volume poker player could dream for, loads and loads of money, milestone cash, a buy-in to a live party poker event, a buy-in to the next millions online, all the things you're basically going to get if you can rake insane amounts on party poker.
Yeah, so what I've seen, you need to generate a certain amount of rake over the course of the year to qualify for this tier. I think it's like $200,000 in rake over a 12-month period. The part that I found really interesting was the milestone bonus at the midway point. So I believe it was, and don't quote me on this, I think it was like $10,000 milestone bonus if you reach the midway point of that $200,000 goal, which to me I think is interesting because it still provides some rewards for those players that may not make it all the way by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's seemingly extremely generous kickback to high volume players. It'll be interesting to see how many people go for it. I know with Supernova Elite it was something in the region of 300 people who would achieve it once a year, but I think many thousands kind of embarked upon it and failed. It's with all these updates from Partypoker, with all the other news in the last week, I think this is, may have been buried a little bit, and I think we'll see, I don't know, a bit more news about it, a few more people kind of going for it. I think maybe because it lacks the seasonality, I think, of Supernova Elite. So that was always a big deal. There was always a big thread in December, who's going for it in January. They had a big sweat thread, how you're tracking. And that was quite a nice idea. I think this is just, you email to say you want to be part of it, and then you get grinding. So it perhaps lacks that immediacy of Supernova Elite. But I think we'll see, it'll be interesting to see, how many people kind of participate in this program and go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting that they provide the flexibility of having this rolling 365-day period for you to qualify, which you would think would be of interest to players. But the other side of the coin is that, as you pointed out, they do lack that critical mass of getting everybody talking about it around one particular point on the calendar.
Yeah, and so the other update, and perhaps the strangest, is that Partypoker's lottery sit and go offer, so their game, like whether it's Winamax Espresso or PokerStars Spin and Go, so their product now, it's been rebranded to Spins. The history with Partypoker is a bit strange with their offer for this type of product. They started off with a game called Sit and Go Hero, which was one of the first to really take the idea and do something quite innovative with it. So rather than just be three-handed. And a bit of backstory, if you don't know at all what I'm talking about, these are the games where you sit in a tournament, they're really, really fast, they only last a couple of minutes, and at the start there's a random prize pool, and you're going to compete either over 2 binds or up to 1,000 binds, and they can be $1 million top prize and that kind of thing. Hugely popular, now available across all products. We talked about it earlier with Unibet's Hexapro. So Partypoker had Sit and Go Hero, which was 4-handed, and it also had a bounty component. So randomly, one player would have a bounty on their head, which is quite interesting. They also launched Sit and Go Jackpot initially on their European sites, the European segregated sites, which was more like a traditional 3-handed lottery Sit and Go. Then on the .com, they brought that in. Then I think Heroes disappeared. And anyway, they've scrapped all that and they've rebranded it to Spins. They are the classic 3-handed, normally winner takes all lottery Sit and Go.
And is it just me, or does that name Spins sound familiar for some reason?
So much like the last, when we talked about, Partypoker being even more aggressive with and more direct with what they're doing. I mean, this has to be the most interesting attempt to basically say, it's basically saying, this is our Spin and Go, and dropping any pretense of, in a way it's quite refreshing, because we've seen about a dozen companies come along with every name under the sun for these tournaments, and Partypoker have gone, you know what, everyone calls them Spins, we'll call them Spins. It's interesting because the format is, PokerStars has been so successful with Spin and Go that Spin and Go, which is shortened to Spins, refers both to PokerStars' interpretation of the format and the format in general. It's slightly ironic in that they didn't come up with it. In fact, they weren't even amongst the first. So Winamax is credited with coming up with this as a permanent feature with Espresso, and then in fact iPoker was the first to ape that format with Twister, and then I think it was even Full Tilt. This was before it was merged into PokerStars. They launched Jackpot, I think it was called, and then PokerStars had Spin and Go. But of course, anything when PokerStars does something, that's always going to be the one that most people play. And so Spin and Go has become the name for the product. And Partypoker, I guess, have just kind of latched onto that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that they didn't pick up our term that we coined.
Well, that's it. We like to drop this into any conversation that we coined lottery sit and go. Much like Mike, we also coined fast fold poker as a term. I like to,
really,
yeah. Well, I mean, in the broadest sense, when fast fold poker came along, it was rush, right? It was full tilts rush poker, and then when the first site copied it. It was like, well, people just called it Rush Poker. It was like, well, it needs another name, and so obviously in Rush Poker, the fold button was said Fast Fold on it. So we thought, well, let's call it Fast Fold Poker. So and the same with the espressos. When Twister came along, we were like, we need a generic term for it. But we went with lottery sit and goes, and I think that didn't really catch on. I still see it, and I see LSNG as well, so it has got some penetration, but. I think a lot of people prefer jackpot sit and goes, but the problem there is a couple of sites actually call their products jackpot sit and goes. So we went lottery sit and go. Not surprising, perhaps the Partypoker didn't call theirs lotteries.
Yeah, well, with all this talk about names, it strikes me as there may be some companies that want to be protective of perhaps the names that they've issued or brands.
I wouldn't like to speculate on those. I mean. So we know the PokerStars does hold trademarks on their games. I think it holds both Zoom and Rush Poker as trademarks. I think there's a news story going back 5 or 6 years that will be on PokerFuse about they registered them in the United States ahead of kind of returning to the market in New Jersey. So there is the potential there. I mean, as you said earlier, there is definitely. I mean, it seems somewhat synonymous with the format in general. So. I wouldn't like to speak on the kind of legitimacy of such claims, but it's certainly an interesting one.
He's not a lawyer, and he doesn't play one on podcasts either.
So now with episode 3 in the bag, question for you, Mike. What are your thoughts on doing seasons of podcasts?
Wow. So, yeah, I guess I'm not sure what kind of criteria we would use to determine when a season starts and another one ends.
Well, I assume the idea of seasons is that you can take a big break in between and people don't feel like you've just gone off the air for weeks at a time.
All right, so 3 episodes will constitute a season, and we are going to take a break now for the next 2 months.
Well, so I was just thinking, right, we're finding it difficult getting all this into 30 minutes each week, but that's because we're in the peak of the season. Maybe come, July time, it's just going to be 30 minutes of dead air.
Or it could be different topics as well. Maybe we start to delve into more of the personalities around the game. I know with the summer there's going to be the WSOP, and there's always interesting stories coming out of that little gathering in Las Vegas.
Okay, I'll leave that to you then.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, I think that's a wrap for us. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. For Nick Jones, I'm Mike Gentili. Take care.